All right, let's dive into something that on the surface just shouldn't be possible. We're talking about a tiny, packed urban island that by all rights should be in a constant state of water crisis. But instead, it's become a global gold standard for water security. And that place is Singapore. So that's the big question, isn't it? How does a country with literally no natural aquifers, no big rivers, not only get by, but become a world leader? How did they manage to flip one of their biggest weaknesses into one of their absolute greatest strengths? That's the incredible story we're going to unpack today. And this really lays it all out. You start with a tiny island, hardly any space to store water, no real fresh water sources to speak of. And now it's a powerhouse in sustainable water management. This didn't happen by magic, believe me. It was all down to a brilliant, and I mean brilliant, long-term strategy.
And that strategy has a name: the 4 national taps. Now, this isn't just some catchy slogan. It is a super comprehensive, diversified plan to make sure every single person has clean water for good. It's a blueprint built on 4 totally different pillars, and we're about to look at every single one.
Okay, let's start with maybe the most famous and honestly the most futuristic tap: NEWater. Put simply, this is super high-grade recycled water. Singapore takes all its used water and runs it through this incredibly advanced purification process, basically turning waste back into a super valuable resource. So how in the world do they do it? Well, it's this rock-solid 3-step process. First up, microfiltration, which gets rid of all the tiny particles. Then comes the real heavy hitter: reverse osmosis. This step strips out even the smallest, most stubborn contaminants. And just to be extra sure, the water gets a final blast of UV light. The result? Water that is ridiculously clean.
And get this isn't just some little experiment. NEWater is a massive piece of the whole puzzle. It meets up to 40%, that's right, 40, of Singapore's entire water demand. It's a huge industrial-scale operation that shows just how serious they are about this.
But here's the kicker: the quality. This stuff is so pure that microchip factories use it, and they need water that's cleaner than anything that comes out of a normal tap. And to get the public on board, the government got really clever. They bottled it, they even partnered with breweries to make craft beer with it, all just to prove a point. This water is not just safe, it's pristine. Okay, so beyond all the high-tech recycling, Singapore is also a master at working with nature. This brings us to the 2nd and 3rd national taps, which are all about grabbing every last drop of water from the sky and from the sea. Just think about this number for a second: 2/3. That is how much of Singapore's entire land surface has been engineered to be a giant water-catching basin. There's this complex web of drains, canals, and reservoirs that channels every possible drop of rain into storage. I mean, the whole city is basically designed to be a sponge. And the absolute crown jewel of this whole rainwater system is the Marina Barrage. It's a dam built right in the middle of downtown, turning the entire city bay into a massive freshwater lake. It's just a mind-blowing piece of urban design. And what's so smart about the barrage is that it's not a one-trick pony. It's not just for water supply, it also acts as a flood barrier for all the low-lying parts of the city. And on top of all that, it's created this amazing public space where people go for fun. It's the perfect example of super efficient, multi-use planning.
The 3rd tap is all about having a source of water that doesn't depend on whether it rains or not. And that's where desalination comes in, the process of taking seawater and making it drinkable. You could call it Singapore's climate-proof insurance policy.
And just like NEWater, we're talking about a huge contribution here. Desalination now covers up to 30% of the country's water needs. So you start to get the picture, right? You've got recycled water, rainwater, and desalinated seawater. They are covering all their bases, creating this incredible resilience. But here's the thing: the strategy isn't just about giant, expensive infrastructure. And that brings us to the 4th and final tap, which isn't a physical tap at all. It's all about the people. It's about changing habits, building a culture of saving water, and becoming a leader on the world stage. And you can see it working. The proof is right here. Through years and years of public education campaigns and smart pricing, Singapore has actually managed to get people to use less water every day. It's dropped from 165 liters per person back in 2003 to around 141 today, and they're aiming to get that number even lower. And they didn't just solve their own problem and call it a day. No, Singapore has flipped the script, turning its biggest challenge into a form of global expertise.
They now share what they've learned with the rest of the world through huge events like Singapore International Water Week. It's a really key part of their identity now. So we've walked through the four taps. It's impossible to deny it's a huge success story. But that leads to the big question. Can every other city dealing with water shortages just copy and paste this blueprint? Well, the pros are pretty obvious. The system is incredibly diversified, which makes it super resilient if there's a drought. It means they don't have to rely on other countries for water, and it brilliantly mixes high-tech engineering with getting the public to change their behavior. It's the whole package. But, and this is a big but, we have to be realistic about the challenges. This model costs a massive amount of money to build and run. Things like desalination still use a ton of energy, and maybe the hardest part of all, it needs incredibly stable, effective, long-term government, and that's something you just can't import. Which leaves us with this final, really important question to think about. Singapore has proved to the world that you can, in fact, engineer your way to water security even when the odds are stacked against you. But is this very expensive, very high-tech, and very centrally managed approach the only way forward for our planet's growing cities? That's a question we'll all be facing sooner or later.